Now, Yomra and I were talking just before you guys joined. You've got a second assessment, which is for this unit, and I've put that up. It's a Word document. I put that up in the files, and it's also, there's a link on Team 1 to it. We'll get to that tonight. We'll have a look at that tonight, or this afternoon. I keep saying tonight, but it's not quite night time yet. And we'll see how we go with that. Ingy's just joining us as well. I'm going to mute people. And Mohammed's joined us as well, so hi. So we'll finish off a few slides that I've got here, and then we'll look at the assessment. The assessment's due by the 21st of October. Kylie has to have the results in by the 29th. That's why we can't really leave it much longer than the 21st. And Kylie will be available from 5:30. She'll log on here just before 5:30. After 5, she's got a meeting. So if you want any assessment support after this, she'll be here for that purpose. And we'll see how we go. And I'll go through the assessment before that anyway. All right, any questions before I get started on these slides? Okay. So we got up to last week, the difference between a trigger and not a trigger. Watching an upsetting topic on TV, maybe getting upset and having a tear for watching Insight or Dateline or 60 Minutes or a current affair episode about a particular issue can be upsetting. It can trigger you feeling uncomfortable and anxious, particularly because you're in a position where you're watching on TV and you can't do anything about it, and you feel a bit helpless because you'd like to do something about it, and that's partly why people donate to telethons and things, or sign up for a cause. So that's not a trigger. That's an upsetting topic. A trigger is when somebody is significantly impacted by something that's happened to them, either to them or to somebody they're working with or somebody in their family. And they lose a loss of time and space, have a loss of themselves, and their emotions are amplified, or they become muffled and numb and almost like a fuzzy head is the one way to describe it, and seemingly unrelated to the situation. So the trigger might be from something from a long time ago, and you're not even sure why you're triggered at first, but then you feel like you're walking into a big dark hole, as that image suggests. I've had people triggered for a whole range of reasons, and I'll talk about that in terms of flashbacks. So you've got the trigger, and then you've got the re-traumatization. You've got reaction and blame as a result of that. Then you have coping and avoidance. So the person works out how to cope and avoid that happening again, and that might include avoiding certain relationships, avoiding certain people. I can think of people who do the opposite. They actually want to be re-traumatized, you would think, it seems, because they look for opportunities to end up in a similar situation. Sometimes that's a behaviour, and the person's not out of the behaviour. The person is still, they don't know any different, is one way of putting it. A positive way of dealing with trauma is to find a way of coping and avoid the trauma, get things back under control, and then people get triggered again. Now, the more times you get things under control, the less time you're going to get triggered, but that's essentially the cycle of trauma. And it can be triggered by sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste are all ways that can be triggered. There's often no actual visual or auditory memory with a flashback. They may have a sense of panic or being trapped, and they might have a feeling of powerlessness with no memory stimulating it. But there will be a reason for the behaviour. They may not be. It may be so repressed that they're not connected with it, but there'll be a reason for the behaviour. And these experiences can also happen in dreams. So we can often have a dream that is traumatic. I have a lot of dreams where I'm processing stuff, and I might be from my old work, for instance, traumatizing me from time to time. I often have dreams with my my deceased parents are in it somehow. Go back in time. They're not necessarily traumatic, but they can be traumatic depending on the topic. And you can wake up and think it's real. There are times when I wake up and think that I'm trapped. I know when I was very stressed in my previous job, I can, from time to time, I sleepwalk, and on at least one occasion, I must have been feeling trapped in the room, and I felt I couldn't get out. And then I ended up at the front door. And my partner's still awake and was saying, "What are you doing?" And I was about to walk out the door, but I think the cold air woke me up at the same time. So, trauma can come to us in dreams as much as it can come to us in real life. I've had students in a classroom. When I taught in Canberra, I had a student who was triggered. I think I told you last week. She was triggered by one of the male participants aftershave, and that reminded her of her sexual abuser when she was a child, because he wore the same aftershave. I've had a number of people triggered by smell. I told you about the dairy farm experience of walking past it. It was happy memories, but it certainly took me straight back to that experience and that smell. And other people experience touch, sounds. There's a whole range of flashbacks can happen. And it can be not just, but it can be pain and body sensations from the physical pain of the trauma, even though there's no physical harm being done. Any thoughts, any comments, any experience of working with people who've been triggered? Sorry? So the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as being able to walk through water without getting wet. This is about vicarious trauma. The fact that we work with people who are traumatized, we work with people who are in difficult positions and needing assistance, and our job is to help them. The fact that we do all of that can lead to us being traumatized by it. Sometimes we're triggered by it. Sometimes we relate to the experience, and it brings back memories of what's happened to us. That can certainly happen with addictions or with sexual assault cases. But it can also just be the sheer immense intensity of the experience with the person that you're working with, the things that are, have impacted, and you've taken it on. So to think you can walk through water without getting wet is a nonsense, and it's the same with dealing with trauma and loss every day. You're going to have vicarious trauma. I've told you about people who work in road accident, and they've got to process that, and they're the first on scene, so they're seeing the horrors of the accident and the people who've died and been crippled and maimed, etc. My father was an air safety investigator, so he used to go to plane crashes, and often they wouldn't be first on the scene, but they may be very close to being first on the scene. And he said some of the trauma of that was quite significant. So you are often going to be in that situation where you're trying to process a lot of stuff. And there's different ways that people do that. Some workplaces are better than others. I think I mentioned child protection and coming back on a Friday afternoon from a case where the father had a gun in the next room, and the child and the mother had retracted their account of what had happened, and it was only because there was an elder son there, and their birth father who was able to take them after the elder son gave us extra information that we're able to take those children out of that situation. But we went back to the office, and the debriefing was a cask of wine in the fridge. There was no management around to process it, and that's quite a common experience in some workplaces where Friday afternoon, people have gone home, there's not a lot of places you can process that information. We debriefed each other essentially, but debriefing is a very important part of what you do. Clinical supervision is a very important part of what you do, where somebody gives you guidance on a case, and they're generally not somebody who's in your team or in your service. They're generally outside of that because otherwise they are involved in the case in a professional manner, and that becomes case management rather than clinical supervision. But case management is also very important in terms of managing workloads. And then there's cultural supervision or cultural mentoring when you're working in particular cultures, and particularly Aboriginal culture, where cultural mentoring can help you to work through issues around culture and cultural safety. So debriefing has been described to me as howling at the moon. So it's an opportunity to get things off your chest, whereas clinical supervision is a way forward and good practice and reflective practitioner stuff. So they are very different in what they offer. Okay, vicarious trauma can change your worldview. I certainly, working in child protection, my worldview changed. I had very little experience of any alternative to happy nuclear family, essentially, and then through child protection I was engaged with foster families, adoptions and abuse cases where we had to place children, remove children, or put systems in place to protect them, and that certainly changed my view of what some parents do and what some children's lives are like. I sometimes had to have nephews and nieces so that I could see that there was a happy place for children, so I could get some sort of frame of reference between what's happening with the children I was working with and with children that I worked with, children I associated with through socialisation. So that gave me a balanced perspective, but definitely changed my view of what was important in the world and on how people engage with children and how people live their lives. But there's also the spectrum of responses, which is about you can have a negative reaction, which is vicarious traumatization. It can cause secondary traumatic stress, and it can cause compassion fatigue, which we often refer to as burnout. So a person can feel that they've got nothing more to offer. They've been working with a number of difficult cases, and when it's time to continue that work, there's just nothing to offer. So compassion fatigue is a big issue. It'll be a big issue in your industry and your sector, and we expect people to bounce back. Sometimes that's not as easy as it sounds. Neutral, the impact is managed effectively. This is almost a twin set and pearls professional social worker sort of approach, where you don't immerse yourself, you don't get engaged in a case, and so therefore you're removed from it. I think that to some extent works, but there's a lack of relationship building, there's a lack of empathy in such cases, so we have to get the balance of that right. But if you're an experienced worker, you may well be able to process it, and it can almost be water off a duck's back because you're aware that things can have a way of working out. You're aware that you can only do so much, and you don't take responsibility for other people's lives as well. And then positive, you can have vicarious resilience, so you can build up a resilience and be able to cope with cases because you've learnt through experience that you can cope with most situations, and then people can rely on you. Vicarious transformation, you change the way you see the world, you change your worldview, you change the way you interact with people, and you don't get sucked in perhaps to situations that you may have at one point, you might have been overly helpful in vicarious traumatization, whereas in vicarious transformation you're coming at it from a different perspective. And compassion satisfaction, you know you've done enough and you know you've done what you can do, but you're not burnt out. Okay. What to look out for in vicarious trauma? Well, you can start to be self-loathing. You can have a loss of hope. You can't see any way out. You have a negative outlook on the world and things around you. There becomes an emotional numbness, where you just numb. Essentially, you have no feeling about the issue. That's compassion fatigue for me. You're feeling overwhelmed. You feel that there's no way out. There's just too much for you to do. You start withdrawing from friends and families. You can't talk about what's happening. You don't want to share. You have an intense rage or bouts of crying. So you get upset at the drop of a hat, it seems, and you start crying uncontrollably. And that can also be stress. I worked with somebody who used to brag about the fact that he had a balanced share portfolio of properties and mining, etc., and he had a number of investment properties, and he was doing quite well, and he had substantial cash reserves, etc., etc. And he cried one day about losing a bus ticket, because it was a $2 bus ticket at the time, I think, or even might have even been $1.20 or something. But he was inconsolable about his bus ticket, and then he realised that he was quite stressed, because why would he be crying about a bus ticket when he had all of these other things happening? Despair, feeling that there is no solution. Exhaustion, just absolutely no energy. Feeling anxious about what's going to happen and what has happened. Anxiety is generally about the future, so it's about what could be an outcome, and starting to worry about things that may not ever occur. Having nightmares about situations. As I said, I've had a number of nightmare type dreams. I'm sure everybody's had some nightmares when they've been in a stressful situation. Resentment. I worked with somebody when I was in Goulburn in child protection. I was the person who was on roster over the Christmas period. We had a number of crisis cases that needed somebody else to come in. She lived locally, so she was able to come in and assist, and she resented that. She resented that why was she the one called in, and why was she the only one working at Christmas. I felt like saying to her at the time, am I invisible? I've been here all week. I'm also working over Christmas. But she had a resentment she was burnt out in terms of child protection. She, in fact, at one point said to me, why, because I was trying to get into law at that time, and she said, "What if you've got all that experience? Why are you here? Why are you in this job?" So she felt she had no other options. She felt that she was trapped in child protection in a country town, and she resented coming in. And her resolution was to drink a strong whiskey at lunchtime when she got home to cope, and feeling unsafe. Just not sure what's happening to you, feeling insecure, feeling that you could be in danger, and certainly you can put yourself in danger if you're not on top of this, and if you're burnt out, you're not seeing what's going on around you, and you might be in an unsafe position in a house, and you're just not picking up on it. I did work with somebody who, it could be a very unsafe situation you're in, and somebody would offer him a cup of tea and he would have said yes, because he wasn't picking up on the vibe around him that there were unsafe things about to happen. What you need to do for trauma-informed care, and this is going to be really important for your assignment, which we're going to go through shortly. We've got 4 more slides to go through, and then we're going to be talking about your assignment. So that's the exciting bit. We'll have time probably to even get working on your assignments this afternoon. But you've got to realise the widespread impact of trauma and understand its potential paths for recovery. So what the trauma could be, and what the impact of that trauma could be, and then realise how people could recover. That's an important step. You've got to recognise the signs and symptoms of trauma in clients, families, staff, and others involved in the system. So you've got to realise what the impact of trauma is. Then you've got to recognise what those symptoms are and how they impact on people. Then you've got to respond by fully integrating your knowledge about trauma into your policies, procedures and practices, making sure that you get everything right, and responding effectively and responding appropriately and not re-traumatising people. And that's exactly the last point. Resist re-traumatisation. Resist re-traumatisation of children and adults. This has mainly been delivered or developed for working with children, but it's also relevant to working with adults. Don't re-traumatise people. Don't be doing things that make them feel vulnerable and put them back in a situation. I see that there is a hand up, Mohammed. Have you got a question?
There is some symptoms for trauma is a bit similar for another mental illness. It's confusing for me, like bipolar, maybe the schizophrenia. There is a bit similar symptoms of the trauma too.
Yeah, well, bipolar and schizophrenia are outcomes, essentially. If somebody's been continually traumatised in their childhood, it's highly likely that they may, not everybody, but people certainly with bipolar or schizophrenic disorders will have had some trauma in their life. And the outcome of that is a mental imbalance. Their biochemical balance is out. They've adjusted to the world around them. They're living in crisis often, and so you will see a similarity between this stuff and mental illness. The difference between the mental illness stuff and this would be that the mental illness can be an ongoing condition, and trauma may not be forever, nor may mental illness, but trauma is something where the person is triggered, and they can go through the event and come out the other side, the same as they can with mental illness. But when you re-traumatise somebody with a mental illness, you're pretty much putting them back into an episode of their mental illness. We talk about psychotic episodes in mental illness, and so you're putting the person back into an acute state rather than a dormant state when it comes to mental health, if that makes sense. There's a lot of crossover, which is why you're doing these two units together, essentially. And people who are not balanced, because of the trauma that they've faced, we can often re-traumatise them. Do you still have a question, Mohammed, or are your hand's just still up because I haven't put it down?
Actually, what's the main symptoms? When I say I can realize the person or the client has a trauma.
Yeah, and whether they've got a mental illness or they don't have a mental illness, our response to their trauma has to be the same. We have to not re-traumatise them, and we have to work with them, and we have to validate their experience. So if you're working with somebody who says they're hearing voices, then you validate that you're not hearing the voices, but you're validating that they're hearing the voices. It's the same as when you're working with somebody with dementia, and they're asking you what time the bus comes. You go to an aged care facility, you see they have a bus stop, they'll have dolls. The people in the aged care facility carry around as if it's their baby. They'll ask the aged care client will ask you what time is dinner, and you tell them, they say, have I got permission from mum to be at dinner tonight? Can I come to dinner? And all of that you validate by saying, yes, no, your mother rang, remember your mum rang earlier, or we spoke to your mum, or the bus is coming in 10 minutes. And they wait for the bus, and then the bus obviously doesn't come. And so they move on to something else, or they say the bus is delayed. And so when you're validating some of the mental illness, you're also saying, I can't hear the voices, but what are the voices saying to you? Right? So you recognise the signs and symptoms, and you respond to them appropriately. So again, your assessment's going to have a question on this. How do you promote a trauma-informed team? Well, you get a change team happening. You make your organisation trauma aware. So you form a change team to work with people to change people's understanding, and that's partly what you'd be doing with these workshops. Conduct an organisational assessment, see where the organisation is at in terms of their knowledge and their systems. Define your goals. What do you want to achieve? When do you want to achieve them by? Make sure they're SMART. You would have come across SMART goals before, I'm sure. Identify trauma champions. Who's going to stick up for your trauma-aware approach? Implement your goals, test your outcomes, identify any new goals, and repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse. Trauma sensitive, you need to be welcoming, you maximise people's safety, make sure your systems are safe and your environment is safe, educate your staff, have parent resources available, focus on empowerment, make sure that the people are feeling empowered, that they are making decisions for themselves and they're being given the tools and the confidence to do that. That's pretty much what empowerment's about. Use first person language, so always talking in I. I can help, I can do this. Don't separate yourself or the person from the context. I'm here for you is first person language. Promote strength through practices. So make sure your practices are correct, and then strength will come from the fact that you're using good practice. View holistically, see the whole picture, see what's going on around you. Share the vision across service systems and address staff issues. So you might have not enough staff, you might have staff who need retraining, but you also need to share the vision across the service, get people on board. Trauma responsive. You need to recognise and respond to the traumatic stress, recognise it for what it is and work with it. Screen for trauma history and strengthen your resilience and protective factors. So build yourself up and build up your organisation's resilience. So there's personal resilience or professional resilience, and then there's also organisational resilience and how well the organisation copes with difficult situations and how well they debrief after a difficult situation, put protective factors in place, address the impact on the family, assist children when children are involved in reducing overwhelming emotion, assist people in your service when overwhelming emotion is affecting them to reduce it, get them to be calm, help people to make new meaning of their lives, and make sure you've got a trauma-informed care system. The whole system is based on understanding trauma, safety, recovery, collaboration, working together. Client agency, which is about the client having control and belief in their own ability to control their situation. We also talk about internal locus control and external locus control in psychology. In sociology, we tend to talk about client agency, so the client's ability to take control of the situation and to think they can take control of the situation. How much agency, how much belief do they have that they can do that? And build empowerment, strength and resilience to make sure things happen. Now, as I said, we had some slides in the MHS007 mental health unit, and these are similar or the same. You need to take self-care. Right, you need to avoid vicarious trauma and to be the best worker you can be for your clients. You need to get physical activity, either sleep and rest, good food, exercise, but you need that to stay on top. You might need to socialise. You need to get out of the workplace and do something different. Maybe socialise with your colleagues, but certainly socialise with friends. Mental, in terms of doing something that activates the brain and is different to what you're doing at work, and that could be playing a game, it could be jigsaws or crosswords or watching quiz shows and trying to get the answer before the panel does, but it could also be watching Home and Away or some other meaningless TV show like Bachelor or Bachelorette or something. I know people are going to go into bat for all of those shows.
Friends.
Friends, there you go. Friends is a good release. Yeah, there's lots of reruns on Netflix or 7mate or 9gem or whatever. And you know, people like Stephen Covey and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People would say that's wasted time. There are better ways to use your time in what he calls sharpening the saw. and I might show you a clip on sharpening the saw in a sec. But sharpening the saw is about taking time out for yourself. So not being bogged down in crises all the time or in work and planning, but also being involved in self-development, professional and personal growth, spending time with the family, but also being ready. So the example of sharpening the saw is about two people who are in a competition, or two people in a community who have to cut down a tree, and one's an older fellow, and he has a saw, and he thinks, I've got to get that saw ready, I've got to sharpen that saw before I cut that tree. And the other one's a younger fellow who says, I can do this easily, I'll take my saw and I'll just cut the tree, and laughs at the old man, because the old man is basically saying, I'll sharpen my saw in the morning, I'll sit down, have a cup of tea and get ready, and then go and cut the tree. And the young person's just hammer and tong going at it and saying, I'll beat you, old man, because I've already started cutting my tree down. And at the end, the older person has cut the tree down in less time than the other person, and the experience becomes, how did that happen? And the young person's like, how did you do that? And the older person says, I sharpened the saw. I need to sharpen the saw. So the sharpening the saw concept is that you take time to regenerate, you take time to be in charge, you take time to be in control, and then you do a whole range of different things that make sure that you stay on top. Spiritual, finding some time for yourself, and emotional, debriefing, as I said, clinical supervision, as I said, are two of the ways you can do that. Other things you do for self-care? It might include a treat such as chocolate, for instance.
I think the main point is distract your mind. If you got depression,
Yeah.
You need to do something to stop the sharp stuff, sharp things, sharp thoughts comes in your mind. Like what you said, going for walk, going for drive, swimming, shower, watch TV, talk to someone else you like, whatever you can do.
Yeah.
So going out and seeing nature can be really relieving as well. Doing those hikes in those, can help in the sense that you're actually out seeing nature, and accessing like really good fresh air as well sometimes. So it really, it's soothing. So that's something that I find useful.
Yes, at the beach, sitting on the beach, listening to the waves roll in is very, very relaxing. Waterfalls, just hearing the sounds of birds and animals in the bushes. You go for a bushwalk, cows mooing in the paddock. I used to do that with my dogs in the country when I was debriefing after a hectic day at work, and it certainly did the trick. Some people, as I said, watch TV, whatever, but this is also about it's about getting away from the heat of the kitchen, if you like, but it's also about you being better at what you do by building resilience. So it's about you staying physically strong and on top of your game, and sharpening the saw is definitely about what can I do to do what I do better, and how can I find time for me and my family as well. You have to. It's about work-life balance as much as anything else. Mohammed, in terms of depression, it is certainly useful if people can focus on something else and get into a different headspace. But when somebody's depressed, that's particularly difficult to do, and it's not necessarily a simple sort of equation of get some more sleep. If the person's not able to sleep, that's not necessarily going to help. But if they learn strategies and they learn to control their thoughts in terms of cognitive behaviour therapy, then yes, you can certainly have these sorts of impacts. Hercules, I see your microphone going, so I presume you want to say something. Or...
Oh yeah, look, what you've said is always true, but to each person they've got their own, and again, choice of better words, triggers or support systems in place.
Yep.
I'm thinking of mine. So I can go back home to a loving family, a loving wife. Although I always say to her, I'm looking to update and get a new model. I've had her for 33 years and it's taken me that long for her to train me. So why would I have to go back through it again? So things like that. So positive, as much as we joke about things like that, it is very comforting that you can go back and have someone who cares and has the time to listen to you, if that's what it is, going for walks, as I think other people have said. The other thing that is quite relieving, or it's a great sensation, watching planes take off and land.
Yeah, I know a number of people who like that, actually.
So I'm fortunate enough to live close enough to the airport without impacting me, that if I wanted to, I can watch planes take off and land. And, that plane, while I'm on that plane, I'm going off to wherever my mind takes me. And it's it's a good place, whatever that good place is, whether it's the
Maldives.
Pardon?
Maldives.
Maldives does nothing for me. Mine for me, it's going up north to Cairns or Port Douglas, or if it's not that, I'll go a little bit further to a place called Greece and the Greek islands. So and somewhere in between, in the Pacific Islands is also very nice as well.
Nice. Well, I did go to the Maldives in the 80s, and although it was a long, 7 days on a deserted island, well, essentially a deserted island, it starts to be a bit too long. It was a good break, but I did use that experience whenever I'm in a dental chair and talking about self-care strategies. Whenever I'm ever in a dental chair, I used to visualize being on the Maldives on the beach rather than in a dental chair, and that tended to work to keep me out of the dental chair. The planes do work for people. I have a number of friends who, I watch planes. I'm under a flight pass, so I see planes all the time. We sort of miss them, even though they make a lot of noise. We're not getting that many of them lately, so there's not as many to watch. But I look up where that plane's, use flight trackers, see where that plane's been, where it's going. And I, unlike you, and wonder where you're going. I wonder why people are travelling. Are they coming for a wedding? Are they coming for a funeral? Are they coming for a holiday? Have they been a business? I sort of visualize in my head the number of people on that plane and what they're doing, etc., etc. So, it gives you an opportunity to get out of your own head and to do other things. So, there's lots of good strategies there that you've mentioned. Some people use all of these. Some people use some others than some more than others. I follow my football team, and fortunately, they're still alive at the moment, so that means I get to go to games. And what I do, I might have the busiest week ever, and I'm generally fairly busy, but I make time just for that. There is no other focus than watching that 90 minutes of football for me. That just puts me, and that also got me through my adolescence, to be honest. That got me through some very difficult times in terms of discovering myself, etc. And there's quite an irony to that, but it's a place where you can be part of a crowd, you can talk to people, but nobody necessarily knows you other than as another football supporter. So it's a place to go and be something different and do something different and get away.
Now that you've mentioned football, you've got to tell me the team.
I'm a South Sydney Rabbitohs supporter.
Mate, no wonder I knew you were a nice bloke. Can I tell you? Glory.
Absolutely.
SSTID, that's all I'm going to say.
All the way to the end as well.
100%.
There we go.
There's also, sorry, I don't mean to break away from your football subject there.
Too blokey here. I'm not. I get too blokey.
But I was actually going to also say art some.
Absolutely. I can get lost in an art gallery as much as I get lost at the football. So
even doing the art itself can be very therapeutic to people. Like actually doing different types of art. Like I took up a bit of geometrical art at one point. It was really fun, and I was doing it for a long period of time, and it was pretty therapeutic at one point. At some point, at times it can get frustrating, especially because it does need a bit of patience, but it can Like, you know, when you've accomplished something, you know, it makes, it makes you feel a bit better.
Yep.
But yeah.
I was learning piano. I was staying in a place where they had a Steinway grand piano, so I figured I probably should learn. I had done some learning earlier, and my mother always wanted me to learn piano, so I got into it, and then I fell off and broke my collarbone on a horse at the same time, so that put an end to that. But what I said to my aunt at the time, who's a violinist, was that I found the music really therapeutic, and she just nodded her head because she lost her husband not long before that. And it is very music, doing an artwork, writing poetry, writing prose, writing stories, all of that, and journaling. I think you talked about journaling and reflecting the other week. All of that is very therapeutic. It's very good for self-care. You get lost in either the music or the art, or any sort of context. You can get lost on when you're talking about walks as well. You can get lost in nature. So all of that is very useful. Playing sport's the other one, I guess. If you're not watching sport, you can certainly be involved in playing sport. And might have mentioned about golf, for instance. You wonder why you're on a golf course and you don't think of anything else. You just think about how bad your game is, essentially. But you're not worried about the pressures of the day and what's going on around you. So, eat healthy, exercise, have fun, take a break, find that work-life balance. That's pretty much what that was about. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of the slideshow. So what we need to do, if there's no questions at this point, is to put your assignment up on the screen, which you should be seeing. Maybe no. Okay. Just trying to. It's not coming up on the screen. If you go to Teams, on the sidebar, channel 1. See if I can get this. Let me try this one. No, you're still not seeing it. Don't know why. You're not seeing my screen, I gather.
We can only see your browser, which is okay.
Okay.
It's on. We can see your desktop now.
Right. So what's happening is on the wrong screen. Hold on. Let me do it. Can you? You should be able to see it now. Then hopefully. Sometimes my Mac goes to the wrong screen, but you should be seeing the assessment now.
Yeah. No, we can.
All right. So obviously your name and your organisation, top of the page. You've got 3 tasks. You've got to answer 3 questions. You've got to read 3 case studies and answer 5 questions, and then answer 4 questions. It's a competency-based assessment. So you'll be deemed competent for the unit once you've satisfied all the elements specific to the unit and the essential knowledge and critical aspects of assessment and performance evidence. The following 3 questions. What are the key principles and practices of trauma-informed care in service delivery as you understand them? So if you go back to your slides, now this is available as a Word document on Teams. And Yomna, you might want to send it around to people, or Francis, you might want to send it around to people, anybody else wants to put their hand up.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Right.
Thank you, Yumna.
Welcome.
Then you've got use the key principles and practices of trauma-informed care. Describe how you would promote safe environments and relationships with those affected by trauma, including preventing traumatisation and re-traumatisation in the context of service use. So somebody comes to your service, how are you going to promote a safe environment and a relationship, and how are you going to not re-traumatise them and prevent any sort of trauma happening? That's the second question. Let's go back to the first one. Identify the key principles and practices of trauma-informed care as you understand them. What would you say the key principles are? And practices. Because you work in the same organisation, I'm happy for you to work collectively on these short answers. I mean, put it in your own words, but brainstorm the ideas together.
Okay, you're asking us to answer these questions.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if we go over them in a brainstorming sort of way, that's going to help you to answer them.
Yeah. Okay. So we'd have to, the key principles and practices are assessing their basically assessing their mental health, I suppose, and making sure that we acquire or obtain the right reports from the correct specialists, therapists, what have you, in order to understand their different triggers that might take place. If there are any behaviour support plans in place, of course, that would also help, and we'd be able to establish what could trigger their emotions and whatnot, and their likes and their dislikes and all of that. And so we would have all of that in their care plan, and and decide, put together their goals and whatever programs they need based on those.
Yeah. So having effective systems, having effective information, knowing what your client's triggers are, having a care plan in place, or a support plan, maybe even a recovery plan in some cases, or an advanced care directive, in terms of when a person's not as well as they are now. Anything else?
So assisting with their therapies where needed, where possible. Like so some therapies, request actual support. What are they called? Therapy support workers, I think they're called. They add to the they'd actually be able to help with these sort of the informed care.
Yep. So I think you also need to think about the systems you have in place in the workplace for protecting clients and protecting staff, codes of conduct, ethical practice. You'd also want to think about, we talked about debriefing and clinical supervision. You want to have support systems in place for the staff so living vicarious trauma, and they're able to maintain their resilience and bounce back. You probably have a number of communication channels and communication strategies in place.
I think the concept of dignity of risk around trauma-informed care is huge, in the sense that if we take away from their freedom, it could cause an adverse reaction to their
particularly if that person's been
to their mental health.
previous in their life.
Yeah. So it's very important that we allow for their dignity of risk at all times, as much as possible.
The other thing that we've got in place in here that is it's good for certainly for our support workers is what we call EAP, so the assistance
program.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a support. That's a way of not re-traumatizing or vicarious trauma for staff. It's a way of building resilience and people having a chance to debrief and
that's exactly right.
issues. So that's also goes in there as an appropriate answer. That's good. All right. Key principles and practice of trauma-informed care. Describe how you would promote safe environments and relationships with those affected by trauma, including preventing traumatization and re-traumatization. So some of what you just said probably flows on into that question, but what are you going to do to promote a safe environment and promote effective relationships that don't re-traumatize or traumatize your clients?
Minimise any triggers that that they may have occurred, or may be known to them, may be known to us, I should say.
Yeah. So minimising triggers. Anything else?
Again, focusing on that dignity of risk.
Dignity of risk, without putting people at significant risk of harm or trauma or further trauma, but not taking away people's rights to make decisions.
Yeah.
And to experience, to have a lived experience. What about responding to? So number B is responding to disclosures of past and current trauma or abuse. So how are you going to apply key principles and practices there? If somebody discloses past trauma or abuse, So
you listen, and as mentioned in the previous what do you call them, presentations that you've done, you would have to listen, validate, like affirm what they've said, make sure that you've, that you've repeated what they've said so that they can understand that you've actually listened to them, and summarize at the end that that's what they've done, that's what their experience was.
Here, validate and support. Yep.
Yeah, and just always, just obviously not showing any kind of judgment towards them for, anything that they would have experienced.
So working with an empathy that allows acceptance and non-judgmental attitude, validating, supporting, referring appropriately. Being there for the person. Yep.
Yeah.
Respond to behaviours that may indicate trauma. So you've got a behaviour, you've got a difficult behaviour that's perhaps indicating trauma. Person might be rocking, they might be regressing, they might be acting out, they might be getting particularly violent, or one of my favourite memories of working in this area is when I worked in King's Cross Adolescent Unit. We had a young woman probably about 15 or 16, and she'd rung a mother from our service, and it had been a particularly traumatic phone call that her mum always triggered her. And she walked out and she put a foot on we had a big, tall, double glazed window at the front of the building, and it was a very narrow window. It was probably not even half a metre, but it was probably 4 metres tall, and she kicked it with a foot. She just put a foot on it and gave it a little kick, and the whole thing smashed. Now, it probably had been smashed, probably been kicked by a number of people with a lot more force than she had done it previously, but hers was the final straw, quite literally, and that changed the whole mood very quickly. She thought she was in a lot of trouble, but we settled that by reassuring her it was okay and these things happen, and she was fine. But her behaviour was an indication of trauma. She lashed out, she acted out as a result of the phone call. It's quite clear what had triggered her behaviour. But so how would you respond to behaviours that may indicate trauma? How are you going to answer that question?
I think it's a quick solution is change the situation of the client, maybe go to somewhere else or talk about a different topic and do something distract client mind.
Yeah. So moving the person along, I guess, in that sense.
Also, basically making sure that there's also positive behavior support whereby you're responding to their just, obviously you'd have to avoid the triggers in such a way that like it's just basically avoiding those triggers in a way. Also, sorry, what were you saying?
So, Terry, the way that I see it in terms of responding to the behaviour, you could potentially, as you said, redirect, calming them down by sort of, when I say getting them to sort of maybe slow down their breathing if they're, when I say hyperventilating, just, putting let's just calm down. Let's just a soft voice, a reaffirming voice, and something to sort of, and as I think Mohammed said, let's look, we're in here. Let's just go over here. Let's just walk away for the moment. Walk away slowly. We don't have to worry about that. In the case of the breaking that, you talk about that shattered glass. Let's just come over here. That it is what it is. Let's just leave it. But let's just get away from it because again, the visual for them may be, look, there's mess everywhere. There's broken glass, and whereas if you go to a safe area, whatever that safe area is, it's a lot more. It's easier to sort of talk to a person and respond to a person.
Yeah. I often talk about the hands that you're just doing as if you're pacifying a wild horse, or really a horse is really it's like there's nothing here to harm you. It's okay. But there's no fast movement. It's all very slow. It's all very controlled. It does depend on whether the person's trying to intimidate you or whether they're fearful. As we talked about in the previous sessions, it's about what behaviour am I seeing? What is this person trying to achieve with this behaviour? Because when you understand the motivation, you can deal with the motivation. When you're trying to guess where they're coming from, you're more likely to muck it up. So work out what's motivating the behaviour and try and calm them down or move them through the situation. The language again would be I statements. Is all about I need you to calm down. I need you to come with me. I need us to sort this out. So you're taking control of that all the time. But definitely it's about maintaining safety of people as well. So anything about the behaviour that indicates trauma that is putting people at risk, we have to diffuse that situation as quickly as possible. And if you're second responder, if you're second person on the scene, or you've come because the duress alarm's being pressed, don't be running in being a hero. Make sure you've assessed the situation before you contribute anything to it, because that's one of the worst things you can do. And I've seen it. I've been in that situation where my boss has come in and made things worse by her actions, rather than finding out what was going on before they just literally laid into the client. So respond to the behaviour in an appropriate way, in a safe way, but understanding that it's coming from a traumatic point of view. The more you understand where it's coming from, the easier I think it is to control it. So and not be triggered yourself by it. How could you not re-traumatize the client? 2 strategies to not re-traumatize the client.
So, if going by previous, data sheets, I suppose, if you've recorded all this information somehow, this is how it works in the behaviour support world. You would have to record every situation which triggered their behaviour or triggered their emotions, etc.
Triggers, yeah.
Yeah, so once you've checked, once you've got that understanding and that knowledge of what's actually triggered them, you'll be able to avoid it properly.
Yeah.
And obviously by understanding the previous experiences, you'd be able to, you know, you'd have a very you'd be very sensitive. You'd have a much more sensitive approach to the way you would deal with the participant at hand. But yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, but in terms of, yep, that's good. But let's look at it again in terms of self-care strategies. So you're going to give them some self-care strategies for them to be able to not be re-traumatized.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
What could we do? I mean, I misinterpreted that to start with as well. But what
Yeah.
could we do to not re-traumatize in terms of self-care strategies? So we're giving them tools and resources for the future.
So okay, so just exercise, you know, meditation,
Yep.
spiritual sort of ways. We spoke about watching TV, watching different shows, playing sports, you know, doing arts, all that sort of stuff.
Yep. And I mean, the second one there is vicarious trauma to yourself. So really, it's what distinction are we going to make here? Two for you and two for them, I guess. But self-care strategy for a client might be more about helping them to process thought patterns, stay on top of something before it gets to them. So giving them some tools and strategies to be able to distract themselves or be able to process what's happening and to recognize when they're being triggered and to stop the trigger. So I'd probably put something like that in A, and then for B, it's what we're talking about, going for a walk and you know, playing music, whatever.
Yeah.
Going to a football game, although they can be very stressful. I find even though I go there to de-stress, I was extremely tense for a considerable period of the first half last week, but the second half was much better. So, case study one.
Again, really.
Back to football again. You can talk about football if you like, but case study one. Mary Jane is a 19-year-old woman who has been diagnosed as having borderline personality disorder. She self-harmed and made two suicide attempts in the past. She experienced severe and ongoing physical and sexual abuse from her parents, and at age 8 was removed from their care by the State Child Protection Authority. Mary Jane had multiple foster placements, often being rehomed due to her increasingly aggressive and sexualised behaviour, and at age 13 she was sexually abused by a relative of one of the foster carers. Since the age of 14 she has several admissions to a mental health inpatient facility, and has also spent 6 months in juvenile detention for admissions for an assault she committed while intoxicated at age 16. She's used alcohol, benzodiazepines, opiates, amphetamines, and cannabis. She's tried the lot pretty much since age 14, and she's had several partners, but states that all of them were physically abusive. The only person she sees as completely supportive is one of her sisters. She's currently couch surfing with friends, but they've asked her to leave. I remember this one quite well. What are Mary Jane's coping strategies? Now, on face value, you might say she doesn't have any, but she does. We all have coping strategies. She's got her sister as a support in her head. Even if she doesn't see her sister, she's got that as a coping strategy. She's using drugs and alcohol as a coping strategy. What else? She's using her friends as a bit of a coping strategy, moving from place to place. You could even argue that one of her coping strategies is not to get too close to people because they've all let her down, they've all hurt her. So if I become a rock, if I become an island, nobody can hurt me, essentially.
The alcohol and cannabis and all those were all, unfortunately, her coping strategies by the looks of it.
Absolutely.
And couch surfing. What's couch surfing?
It's sleeping on people's lounges going from house to house, and so it's a type of homelessness essentially. It's also a web app where if you're traveling the world, you can couch surf by staying before. As opposed to Airbnb, it's more I stay with you and I do a few odd jobs for you, and I pay you what I think I should pay you, or I don't pay you at all. It's a very laissez-faire sort of way of traveling the world. But yeah, so in her case, it's going from house to house and sleeping a couple of nights here until people get sick of her, quite literally, and she moves on to another house.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a coping strategy in itself. She's got somewhere to stay. She doesn't have to obey any rules. She doesn't have to be in a foster placement. Not that she'd be in a foster placement at her age, but she doesn't have to stay in a refuge. She doesn't have to cope with authority that she doesn't trust anymore, probably. All of that. What are her resources and her strengths? Well, she's a survivor. That's one of her strengths. She survived quite a bit. So, what else?
Yeah, she's adaptable to change in terms of going from place to place.
That's right. She's able to keep functioning even though she's not in any sort of functional system, really. She's able to identify that maybe when she needs help that she can go to a sister. She's able to identify when she's maybe needing that sort of assistance. How would you support Mary Jane to recognise her resources and her strengths? How would you get her in touch with what she can do well and how she survived? You'd build some self-belief, wouldn't you? You'd get her to see what's worked for her and how she has survived up until now, and to identify, even build a resource chart, like what's going to work for her in terms of connections, etc. Number 4, describe the strategies you'd use to prevent re-traumatising Mary Jane when working with her. So how are you going to work to not re-traumatise Mary Jane? You're going to look at her safety in terms of where you place, what services you refer her to, give her some tools to be able to report anything that she feels is not right. Get a safe and maybe supported accommodation. Anything else? Number 5, where would you refer Mary Jane to? And what would you include in the referral in terms of information?
I suppose some good support systems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'd have to, you would probably try, a psychologist, you would try a behaviour support specialist maybe, if necessary, if there are any behaviours, serious behaviours. There are, you could try to, in the referral, you would have to include her past experiences, like thorough, like a summary of her situation her mental health. Mm-hmm. And just if there's anything, if there are any behaviours that they need to think about. Yeah.
All right. So and it may be you might refer her for housing. You might refer her for drug and alcohol treatment, depending on where she's at with that now. Counselling is somewhere you could refer her for, perhaps. Mm-hmm. Case study 2, Amira is 17. She's a refugee from a country that experienced a long period of civil war with various factions in the country fighting for control. Amira's parents were killed in front of her when the militia raided their village. Amira and her 2 younger siblings managed to escape, and with other survivors from their village made their way to a refugee camp in a neighbouring country. Amira spent 5 years in the camp, during which time one of her siblings died from malnutrition and disease. Amira was also sexually abused in the camp. She came to Australia to live with a cousin 3 years ago. There are a few members of her community in the town she is living in. Amira has made only 2 friends that she talks to. She struggles with learning English. Her cousin has decided to move to another city with her family, and Amira doesn't want to move with them. She's come to your service to talk about her housing options. She knows she's very thin and looks dishevelled. She also appears very listless and uninterested in her future. What are her coping strategies?
Well, she finds that not eating might probably make a difference to her. That's her coping strategy, apparently.
Yeah. How would you put that? Some self-destructive behaviour doesn't deserve any better type of thing, I suppose. But she's made some friends, so that's part of the coping strategy. Again, she survived the camp, and she has perhaps maybe not processed her parents' death, but she's somehow managed to block it out because she's survived the experience. She's connected with family. But yeah, she's not taking a particular amount of self. She's not looking after herself at the moment, that's for sure.
But she's looking to, she looks to improve her living situation, which means, finding a solution for her is a coping strategy. Like people who've come out of situations like those, they tend to, want to look for solutions more, I suppose.
Yep, so her coping strategy is she's asked you for help. She's come to you for help. And she's put her hand up.
Yeah.
So she's looks as a strong girl to look after his siblings and so move from country to another country to save them.
Yeah, and she voted with her feet. She moved from a war-torn country to a refugee camp. She put up with the refugee camp and all the traumas of what happened there. But she survived that. She made her way to here. So she's done positive things before. And she may be feeling she needs her cousins in her life, but maybe part of identifying resources and strengths would be identifying that she's been able to survive on her own before, pretty much, in worse circumstances than she's probably in now. She's also come for help, so that's a strength. She's got a couple of friends. How would you support Anna? How would you support Amira to recognise her resources and her strengths? So, how would you get her to see what she's got going for her?
I know. Amira just realised that her name was being repeated.
I thought it was a familiar name. You should be able to blitz this then, Amira.
Yes.
How would you support her to recognise her strengths and resources?
I think always talk to her in positive way, remind her about her champion past. She did a very good history. She did very good works, and then always encourage her to continue and then do her job.
I was keep getting these calls all the time from you guys, so that's why I joined the VIP to see continuation.
That's good.
I wanted to.
What else?
And if there's something I really like, I'll contribute more to it.
How would you?
I was just wondering, could you like take me off the calling list so I don't receive it?
So you have to build her confidence. Yeah, you have to work with her to. You listen to her, find the things that she's done well, and empower her. Listen to her story, and give her hope. Really, give her hope that there are things that she can do. How would you not re-traumatize Amira when you're working with her? What strategies would you use? It's not going to be that dissimilar to the previous one, is it? It's going to be about making sure that you know what the triggers are, stopping the triggers from happening, not putting her in difficult situations. Anything else? And where are you going to refer Amira to?
I think in psychiatrists or psychologists, and at the same time, she has to live in a safe house or safe place.
Yeah, so psychologist or counsellor. Psychiatrists, generally for rich people. You might get a psychiatrist if she's been diagnosed with a mental illness and she's part of the health system. But yeah, so psychologist, counsellor, GP for a medical check, because she sounds like she's malnourished. Housing, again, I mean, we're not running a prison service here, so we're not able to say that she has to stay in this place. She doesn't have bail conditions, but we can certainly encourage her into a supported, semi-supported housing, or get her into housing where she's able to live independently. Could Amira live independently? Do we think that she would be able to do that?
I think she needs some time.
Yeah, she's 17. She's probably needing some semi-supported accommodation. She may go to a youth refuge in the short term as a way of having some support service put in place and some case planning happening, with a view to her going into housing later on. But the first step might be a youth refuge, because she's essentially going to be homeless when her family leaves. Okay, case study 3. Philip's a 21-year-old Aboriginal man who's removed from his family at the age of 7 because of severe physical abuse and neglect. He lived with his grandparents until age 13. He ran away due to sexual abuse over 3 years by a friend of his grandfather's. Grandfather refused to believe Philip when he disclosed and gave him a severe beating for lying. Philip's grandmother is frightened of her husband, but has secretly maintained contact with Philip and gives him money when she can. Philip has mostly lived on the streets since then. He's used a variety of drugs to cope and has worked as a sex worker to finance his drug habit. Last week he was beaten up by a client who refused to pay and was also diagnosed with hepatitis C. He's been coming to the drop-in centre for homeless people where you've worked for some months and you have a fairly good relationship with him. Today he's coming to say he's going to say goodbye. He can't see the point of living anymore. What are Philip's coping strategies? The drop-in centre has been part of his coping strategies, obviously.
A bit similar for case number 1 here.
Yeah, that's right. Very similar sort of background, and he's acting out in a way that case number 1 probably wasn't. But yeah, his coping strategies is to make money in the way that he knows how, and that links to his abuse. It's been sexualized as a child, so it's turned to be a sex worker. He's using your service, so that's a coping strategy. His grandmother is still, she's maintaining contact and giving him money when she can. So contact with his grandmother is a coping strategy. Anything else? Again, he's a survivor. He's had a lot happen and he's still here. What are his resources and his strengths? His ability to seek out help, the ability to come and tell you that he's thinking about not going on with it, not living anymore. So his ability to come and talk to you. His relationship with the service. His entrepreneurship, if you like, his ability to survive by putting himself into his own business as a sex worker. So putting that into a positive frame is about him being able to do something to survive and be able to contact his grandmother, not be too shy to ask for help. How would you support him to recognise his resources and strengths?
I think we need to contact with OT to find out a proper job for him to make proper money.
Yep. So get him some support to get some meaningful employment that's safe. That would go into your referrals as well. Again, you'd talk to him, wouldn't you? You'd talk with him about what he's doing well. What else would you do? You get him to self-reflect on what works for him when has he felt good, when has he felt that he's in control. Strategies you'd use to prevent re-traumatizing. Again, you wouldn't put him at risk. You'd try and get support systems in place. I'd be doing a contract with him so he agrees not to self-harm before he next sees you. And a contract to work to... I did a contract with one of my work colleagues once when I was a manager for him to regain his smile. So something similar about, a way for him to be happy, a way for how do we get Philip to be in a good place. Some sort of contract on that. Anything else you'd try there? And where would you refer Philip?
Also, you need some medical treatment with his psychologist, GP.
And hepatitis C will also have support groups for people living with hep C, so that's a way for him to connect. But yeah, certainly go to his GP, but you could also go to the Hepatitis Australia, to their hepatitis centre.
Rehab for drugs.
Yeah, yeah. Yep, detox and rehab, and that's probably going to, that's going to keep him safe. If you can get him into a detox and rehab straight away, then that's a good chance to keep him alive and getting cleaned up at the same time. And so that would be similar, as Mohammed said, be similar to number one in terms of Mary Jane. in terms of services. Okay. Now, task 3, you've got to identify opportunities to embed trauma-informed care and practice in your service delivery.
So I think trainings are always helpful when it comes to things like that. Like, you know, so when it comes to trauma-informed care, workers have to be upskilled to understand how trauma-informed care works, basically.
Yep. So professional development of staff, so they're aware of what trauma-informed care is and how to manage it.
Yeah.
Hello, Kylie. How are you going?
Good, thanks, Terry. Hi, everyone.
Hello, how you going?
The support team has arrived. We're just doing the last question in assessment 2, going over it. So
Sure, no worries.
that'll be a nice little symbiotic move
Segue.
to assessment support. Yeah. So identify opportunities to embed trauma-informed care and practice in service delivery. So as you said, professional development of staff, being aware of what trauma-informed care is and how not to re-traumatise people and to respond to trauma. What else?
Yeah. So, I guess having, you know, just I guess policies and procedures around certain ways to make sure. I mean, certain concepts around trauma-informed care, particularly when it comes to you know, behaviour support, like positive behaviour support, perhaps. You know, like mental health, all that sort of stuff. So, and dignity of risk and whatnot.
Yep.
So, yeah. So those policies would then help with outlining our procedures of how we would document certain things and reporting them to the relevant specialists and getting, you know, I guess that help, that assistance from those therapists as required.
Yep. And having the right policy and procedures in place as well, as you're saying.
Yeah.
And if we go back to the slide when you're doing this, if you go back through the slides, the slide that's on recognise, respond, refer, you know, all the R's, not re-traumatise. That fits very nicely for task 3, number 1, because it's about what does your service do. It's about looking at the organisation and making sure the organisation has the right practices in there for clients. But remember, it's also about the self-care strategies, the debrief and the clinical supervision, the the ability for people to step away from the plate when it's too hot, that sort of stuff, and the bounce back resilience. Yeah. Okay. Number 2, identify barriers to implementing trauma-informed care and practice in the service. What's going to get in the way?
If the client doesn't want to respond, sometimes they're they reject the help. You know, they don't want to cooperate, but and the lack of knowledge from the person who's helping can also generally from support workers or whoever, the lack of knowledge can rather make things harder to reach those goals when needed.
Yep. So a resistance from the client and an inability to break through, but a lack of resources and knowledge from the staff as to how to deal with that. Yep.
Right.
What else? But remember, this is about the organisation and barriers that might have.
Self-care, yeah. So the organisation has to encourage self-care. So if the workers aren't caring for themselves, they probably won't be able to provide that trauma-informed care as required as well. So that's another thing.
Self-care needs to be there.
Yeah.
Self-care strategies need to be there from the organisation perspective.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. I suppose the lack of reports, if we don't have enough documentation from other therapists, enough information.
Lack of information, lack of communication, lack of information. So lack of communication strategies all up, really, but lack of people not following up and getting the right information, but people also not providing it.
Yeah.
And not being some organisations don't place much focus on that sort of information, but yes, it's absolutely essential to inform practice.
Correct. Yeah.
I often give the example of I used to read when I was in child protection. I used to read all the case notes before I went to a client's house, and one of the clients I went to in a small country town. There was a note in the file. It was a little obscure note from a few years ago that said that she threw coffee cups and teacups at him as he walked down the hallway because she wasn't happy with what was said. And I always had that in my mind when I went to that house. And I had a similar experience when we were talking to them about the care of their children. So I was sort of ready for it. So case notes can help you can help you with safety apart from anything else, but making sure that people have the right information. But barriers might be resistance. People don't want change. That's another thing to think about there. And the organisation might think it's too difficult, might be in a too hard basket. Number 3, invite and respond consumer feedback on trauma-informed practices and service delivery. So how are you going to invite and how are you going to respond to consumer feedback about your service and what they do and how they respond to trauma? You probably did some of this already.
Invite and respond to consumer feedback on trauma. Okay, so there are feedback and concerns, policies, and obviously the complaints procedure. Complaints handling procedure that should we take it all into like we'd have a responsive procedure based on that. They make a phone call, fill in a form, whatever, what have you. Like we'll respond to it within 24 hours with our response, and then action it according to whoever's responsible for it.
So that's probably about complaints. What about just general feedback on how you're going?
So you take it, you'd have a register for that if when necessary, like if they come in forms. You'd have a register and you discuss them generally with management, and management would potentially come up with an idea of how they can respond to that feedback. If it's a negative one, and if it's a positive one, they uphold it and they inform the rest of the team.
So promoting the good and addressing the bad. But one of the key things I think that people don't do in services is they get the feedback, but they don't actually do anything about it. So that's partly what that question's about, I think, is making sure that you do follow through and change systems. Number 4, based on the barriers identified in question 2, which was about what barriers are in the way, how would you go about influencing policy development? And how would you go about identifying and participating in strategies to enhance service delivery? So firstly, how would you influence policy development? If you had barriers in your workplace to trauma-informed care, how are you going to change policy? How are you going to change people's management's approach?
So you bring up these cases to your meetings, and you inform them of how it's affected various participants.
Yep.
And therefore, by having if people look at data, it's a generally a data sort of approach.
Yep. Did you get Hercules on side?
Sorry?
You'd have to get Hercules on side, wouldn't
No, you wouldn't get me on side.
Yeah.
No, you'd have to communicate. You'd have to communicate your information to sort of, as what Jungner was saying,
Yeah.
just expressing and, what can we do to make it better?
You have to build a case, wouldn't you? And then get that case.
Yeah, exactly. Bringing up the cases that were affected and are we actually making a difference? Are we able to reach certain goals? Are we not reaching those goals, and why? Basically, given the feedback from different therapists, or even through progress notes, are we analyzing progress notes? Are we getting any information? Like, can we see what's happening through the behaviours of general progress notes?
Is there enough self-care going on, etc., etc.? And then the last one is identify and participate in strategies to enhance service delivery. So how are you going to identify and participate in strategies? So you said what you're going to do and you're going to inform people, but that's about what are you going to do as a strategy? How are you going to get your case heard, if you like? How are you going to get people on side? If you look at Kotter's change management principles, there's 8 stages of change in Kotter's management principles. That's actually quite useful there. But it's basically about getting people on side, building a case, getting champions, all that sort of stuff. But you've probably got some other ideas as well.
Yeah, that's it. So it's always building a case and using data, always facts to
following through
and bringing it up to management and letting them know that certain things haven't really been the way they need to be.
And modelling the behaviour.
Sorry?
Modelling the behaviour you're expecting of others, etc.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Okay. That's 5:30, so that's our changeover shift time.
Yeah.
So Kylie's there for you. Thank you for your time for the last couple of weeks. It's been a pleasure to have you in class, and hopefully you got something out of it, and get those assessments done by the 21st of October. But Kylie will talk more about that because that's what she's here for.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your help, Terry. Thank you for all your time over the last few weeks. I feel like we've touched on very important topics throughout the last 3 weeks. It's and I'm hoping that the rest of the our staff feel the same.
Yep.
And they learn the same. Thank you so much for your time over the last few weeks.
Thanks for your participation, and it's a difficult topic area, but it's an important topic area. So thank you for being involved.
It's a very critical topic, mental health, in this day and age. So it always has been, but it's good to have that knowledge so that to improve our service delivery, of course. Yeah.
And sharpen the saw and keep your self-care going.
Absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, glory, Terry, to Saturday night.
I'll get in trouble with Kylie.
Yeah, we don't go there.
Of course we do. We have to.
Wait a minute. Who are you supporting, Kylie?
The only team that ever exists in the NRL, but my team, we're socially distanced from the premiership.
Oh, right.
The Bulldogs. We're a proud Bulldog supporter. So we've decided to take COVID-19 very seriously this year, and
okay.
Let it be known, South helped out the Bulldogs by not allowing them to win another trophy called the Wooden Spoon this year. So
that's what we were going for, and we even failed that.
It's a passion. It's a relief. Come Saturday, that's what will happen. Anyway, thank you. Can I have a 1-minute break? I need to
Definitely.
back.
Guys, I've been listening, but I couldn't respond because I had back-to-back meetings. But I can hear my name, and and I tried to respond, but I can't because I have people in the office, and I'll be like, okay, 1 minute. They're like, oh no, we need to talk about this. But I've been listening, I promise.
And Michael's been here as well, listening too. I'm in Amira's office with these back-to-back meetings.
He's a liar.
What a snitch.
That's so funny. So if you want to take a quick break, and then we can come back in 2 or 3 minutes, and we can work out where to from here.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
That's okay. So I take it, Hercules, you're a South supporter, are you?
Red and green. One eye red, the other one green.
All right. Okay.
And just for the record, I got it out of Terry. He's not the one who raised it. I did, and then I found out. So
That's okay. He always gives it to me, but I always, I'm a Sydney FC member as well, so I say, oh well, when one code doesn't work, I just jump ship. So
no, we ride the highs and the lows of.
Yeah, me too, unfortunately. So yeah, pretty low at this time. But then again, I enjoyed watching the Wallabies on Sunday. They did quite well. So
yeah, well, yeah, apparently they did. I've old school friends and who were mad Wallaby supporters, and I could take it or leave it, to be honest. But when it comes to the league, kettle of fish, we're quite passionate in our place.
Yeah, maybe. But I think I just don't like the rules now. So I think a lot of the grit and grind of the game has gone from it. And it's very different to what it used to be.
Absolutely. There's a lot of wrestling, as I call it. And
it's like a lot of tripping, putting the leg out and things like that. And,
pulling down. And look, certain teams are a little bit more infamous for trying to slow the play down. And anyway, it is what it is. And we'll wait and see what happens on Saturday night. Anyway, time will tell.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's always, at least, we have something to do in these crazy times that we're all living in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's a good distraction.
Look, that's one thing the government or the governments in plural sort of recognised, and they got part of it right. My view, they still need a little bit way to go, but and it's a fine balance because there's people's livelihoods, and we talk about mental health, and that's very important. For some of us, we're lucky we are working, but and getting out. Then you got others who just are stuck at home and there's no work, and that in itself is not good.
No, and it's a very dangerous time for people who are vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is a very dangerous time for them. So it's good if there's, people have hobbies that they can attach to and relate to, because it's a very good distraction for, unwell or unproductive thoughts.
Yes, unfortunately, as you said, there's that. And look, and hopefully they've got, we hope they have good support systems in place, and,
Yeah.
Until
the reality is that our mental health system is very broken.
Oh, look, it is, and it's very challenging. And I have a niece who is a psychiatrist in one of the hospitals, and it's really, quite challenging, if I could put it that way, for different reasons. And
it's just not working at all, unfortunately. So no, it's sad. It is sad to see that people have to get to a point where they're actually hurting themselves to get help.
Yeah, well, that's right. What are they crying? They're crying out for help, and they're crying out for attention in turn, which really means that they're crying out for help. And what does that mean? To get that attention, self-harm, doing other things that you probably wouldn't normally do is always very difficult. So
yeah, definitely, it's very, very sad.
Yeah. So what are we continuing on? What are we?
So what we're doing is everyone went to have a couple of minutes break.
Yep.
And then we're coming back and we're going to talk about where to from here.
Yep.
And what best suits everybody. So
sure.
Some people, like this format. Other people prefer more one-to-one, and that's what we're going to go through now, and work out generally what the consensus is with this kind of session. So we'll wait for everyone else to jump back on, which hopefully they're all coming back, and then we can have the conversation, and then everyone can go and live their lives.
Yes.
Yeah. But it is good. It's great that the organisation wanted and fought very hard to get this skill set.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
look, we've been exposed to it, and it sort of cements, I suppose, the approach in some ways,
Yeah.
and it reaffirms the direction. And for us that we're trying to upskill for some of us, and for all of us in actual fact, and for that what we do know, and for some of us this is a new space that includes me. But then when you start putting it into the context, you sort of are aware of it, but in the manner and the terminology that's used, it just again reaffirms approaches when people with mental health. And look, it comes down to two basic words for me, and that's communication and boundaries. And once you've got that as the base, it's a very simplistic approach that I have, but then that's the form of the basis. Then the rest of it hangs off that in terms of how you do it.
Yeah, you've got to have a starting point.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
and that's very, very, very true. So yeah, and the reality in disability is that you will have. We know more than 70% of people with a moderate to severe intellectual disability